The Star Wars Skywalker saga has had no shortage of iconic villains from across the decades, from the estranged Jedi Master Dooku taking a turn to the dark side, to the Sith assassin Darth Maul being reborn from the ashes of the Clone Wars and rising to prominence once again, to perhaps one of the single most iconic cinematic villains of all time in Darth Vader himself. The Star Wars universe has had a ready supply of iconic Sith Lords to draw from, while the likes of Darth Bane and Darth Nihilus hold special places in Legends continuity as two of the most powerful Sith Lords that have ever lived. One canonical antagonist largely serves as the overarching shadow that curses the Skywalker saga to its core. And we are talking, of course, about Sith Master Darth Sidious, aka Emperor Palpatine. Palpatine has perhaps been the single greatest looming threat that has tormented 3 generations of Skywalkers across the decades, and has served as one of the greatest adversaries to the safety and security of the galaxy at large. Though he has been present in all 3 trilogies as well as a myriad of additional material, his motivation typically seems to boil down to simply being evil for evil's sake, raining darkness over the galaxy simply in a greedy power grab to control as much as physically possible, to the point of bending the very fabric of the Force to his will. So what motives led him to this point, and why does he hate the Jedi with such an intense, burning passion? Well, stick with us today, weary travelers of the galaxy, as we take a deep dive into Palpatine's true motives, his backstory, and the reason for his hatred of the Jedi Council and the Jedi practice as a whole. There are a few factors that led into this hatred, and the first that we'll be covering today is the fact that he believed that they had the power to inflict their will and control over the galaxy, yet the Jedi refused to do so, electing instead to wait for missions from the Senate. He revealed to Higo Damask, secretly his eventual master Darth Plagueis, that they held far too much power in their hands to simply let it fester away and not do anything of value with it. Palpatine desired to make radical change, and believed that the Force offered him the ability to do so. And though he was incredibly gifted in Force sensitivity, the Jedi still did not discover him as a youngling and trained him as a Jedi Knight. Upon knowingly voicing his opinions to Plagueis, he took Palpatine under his wing, and the two experimented with the darkest aspects of the Force, attempting to amass power by bending the very foundation of the Force to their will. Plagueis sought to create a Force dyad between the two, which is simply defined as two beings who are one with the view of the Force, as we come to learn throughout the sequel trilogy, as Ben Solo and Rey are revealed to be a living dyad within the cosmic Force. Though this pursuit ultimately failed, they still sought to tamper with the powers of life and death in order to master control over life and the Force itself, dictating their will upon it. The Jedi choose to move with the Force like a river, but the Sith, Plagueis and Palpatine, attempt to bend it to their own will. Plagueis learned how to manipulate the midichlorians within a life form in order to create life of his own accord, which is famously how Anakin Skywalker was born in Legends continuity. And Sidious later learned how to avert his own death via the imperfect cloning practices that included transferring his consciousness into mutated bodies. Palpatine saw the power that the Force held within its grasp, as well as incredible abilities that could have been utilized in a number of different facets, and being forced to watch the Jedi Order bow to the will of the Senate made him utterly furious and disgusted with them. He believed that the Force had selected each member of the Jedi Order for great things, and yet they relegated themselves to beings that held no potential in the Force whatsoever, couldn't even touch it. This is something that not only puzzled Palpatine, but again infuriated the Sith Lord. He perceived each of the Jedi as greater beings, yet he hated them so adamantly because they chose to do nothing with this great potential. The Jedi effectively had access to the single greatest well of immeasurable power with which they could do whatever they wanted. Yet they simply sat around and waited for orders, which he neither condoned nor did he truly understand due to the power of religious indoctrination. Upon training under Plagueis, Palpatine was being groomed to inherit the viewpoints of the Sith. Plagueis, the longtime heir to the rule of two, an effective descendant of Darth Bane, conditioned Palpatine to embrace his anger and his hatred in order to truly tap into the power of the dark side, and Palpatine directed this anger towards the Jedi Order, inflating his hatred of the group at the behest of Plagueis. Not only did he disagree with the means of the Council and their approach to their use of the Force, but this discontentment eventually grew into hatred and anger as he drew on the power of the dark side, and as his power grew, he came to hate the Jedi even more as he learned what level of power they effectively had at their disposal. An army of Force-sensitive gods that simply relegated their own will to that of beings that had no right to dictate their actions. This endless cycle of rage and hatred fueled both his immense dark side abilities and his negative viewpoints on the Jedi Order, eventually leading him to concoct a plan that would allow him to do what no Sith before had been able to achieve: the complete annihilation of the entirety of the Jedi Order. From there, he sought power and control, which may seem like a lackluster motive, but fueled by the religious motives that the Sith had indoctrinated into Palpatine from a young age. This lust for power and the feeling of affirmation that came from being able to exercise this grandeur over the Empire is what Palpatine sought to hold on to by any means necessary, as well as continuing the legacy of the Sith for generations to come. We know that he was pioneering different means of immortality, and that these worked with varying degrees of success, as well as was technically able to preserve his consciousness after the death of his physical body. The forms that he attempted to take on afterwards were notoriously faulty and incompatible with his mind and his ability to touch the Force, however. This led to the eventual creation of Rey, who served as a perspective vessel to allow Palpatine to truly conquer the power of life and death, thus rivaling even the Force in terms of raw power, or so he came to believe. His ability to conquer the force of life would have ensured his eternal reign and his supremacy as the greatest Sith Lord that had ever lived, and yet would never die. The one who finally was able to evade death with the permanence and escape the fundamental truth of the universe that all life must eventually come to an inevitable end. While the Jedi viewed this as a cylindrical transfer of energy that kept the fabric of the universe and the Force in eternal balance, the Sith viewed the end of their mortal lives as a limit to their power that they sought to conquer. This precedent is most widely seen in Plagueis' desire to manipulate midichlorians, which he then passed down to his apprentice, who utilized this practice to preserve his own mind and sought to reconstruct himself within a new body. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of this new layer to Palpatine? Do you agree that the Jedi had the power to do more than what they eventually did? And how do you feel about them ultimately relegating themselves to the Senate? Something that Luke Skywalker surprisingly would agree with Palpatine on, deciding not to serve the larger Senate when he was a Jedi Knight, and instead choosing to follow the will of the Force itself, rather than the will of others that could become corrupt. Ultimately, something that Palpatine and Luke had similar views on. Anyway, my friends, thank you as always so much for watching this video. Please leave your thoughts and opinions on this in the comments down below. May the Force be with you, and I hope to catch you in the next one.